Welcome to Dory Cote on Shamanism, a weekly podcast that explores one theme in shamanism throughout each month. Get comfortable, have a seat, and let's get started.
Welcome to my podcast. I am delighted to be introducing the topic of the shadow in this series, and I welcome you to listen to this next 4 sessions that I will be sending along to you.
Dory, what do you mean when you talk about the shadow?
What I mean when I talk about someone's shadow is that aspect of themselves which is 2 possible different things. One is the opposite of a positive aspect, and the other is a projection or a way of being that is an old ingrained belief system that has them stuck in anger or a belief that they can't heal, a belief that their life is terrible because of their childhood or anything like that. So let me explain that a little bit more. When I talk about the opposite aspect of something, let me use this as an example. We all are taught, of course, from a very young time, particularly when we begin school, to start using judgment, to use a discerning tool, to make decisions about how we should dress when it's snowing outside, or how we should respond to a hot burner on the stove, how to respond to something that somebody says to us, saying thank you, saying you're welcome, those kinds of judgmental things that are helpful, that are good aspects of the quality of judgment. And then there's the shadow side of judgment. And that kicks in when we overuse judgment and we begin to look at things that are happening or people or events and begin to write our own story about them. For instance, perhaps you're in a public place and you see somebody who is dressed in an odd kind of manner, or something that you would judge as an odd kind of manner. They're wearing something that you would never imagine yourself in your wildest dreams wearing. And you begin then to project onto them a whole story about what that person's life must be, what they must be like, who they are, where they must have grown up, and so on and so forth. So now you're in a state of judgment, which is really the shadow side of your judgment quality. And that is not necessarily bad, but it is something you need to know about. You need to know that you have that as a part of who you are and learn how to work with it. The other way in which the shadow shows up in our lives is when we project qualities onto other people. For instance, you have a situation in which you get stuck in your own drama. Maybe you get into a disagreement with somebody at the grocery store. You know, the clerk at the grocery store looks at you the wrong way or says something mean to you or seems unfriendly, and you leave the store and you feel really terrible because now you have this record going on in your head about he was a terrible guy, he never should have said those rude things, I think I should report him to his supervisor, he probably beats his wife, and the next thing you know, you are all worked up into something really, really agitated about this event that happened that maybe took 10 or 15 seconds of your time, but has triggered you into old stuff that has you worked up. Now you're in your shadow. You're creating a story, you're creating a drama about something that perhaps was really not that significant and may really be a projection of your own anger or disappointment at somebody else or some other event in your life. Is that necessarily a terrible, terrible thing? No. But what's important is that you come to know that you have this shadow quality, and how do you come to know it and work with it? That's what I'm talking about when I talk about the shadow.
Is one's shadow something that a client should be looking to eliminate or tame?
I would never suggest to somebody that they look to eliminate the shadow aspect of themselves, or even tame the shadow aspect of themselves. It is far more productive and actually more beautiful and more complete and more filled with spirit if one looks at their shadow as something they want to come to know about themselves and learn how to work with rather than tame. Taming, to me, implies that what you want to do is try to control it and move it away, when in fact, we are whole people. Just as, people talk about the yin and the yang. There would be no yin if there wasn't a yang, and there would be no yang if there wasn't a yin. It takes both parts to make the whole. And so the shadow part of ourselves is not something we want to push away, but rather come to know and work with so that we can become more fully human and express all of our humanness on an everyday kind of basis.
How does someone know when shadow work might be useful? Does a shamanic practitioner usually suggest it, or is there a way that someone knows that they are ready for this work?
In general, I have worked with my students, people who come to me to study shamanism around the issue of shadow, because it is such a critical aspect of being able to fully step into the power of being a shamanic practitioner. We say that one cannot really truly be the hollow bone, that pure channel, if our shadow is getting in the way, if we aren't fully showing up 100% and allowing our whole selves to be involved in the work. So in terms of clients, I often suggest to a client that they use some of the tools that we'll talk about in a future session, some of the tools that are available to them that will help them identify what are those aspects of their shadow that are playing with them right now, and how might they work with those shadow pieces effectively. I don't always necessarily, with a client, call it the shadow aspect of who they are, because that can bring up a whole nother set of questions and judgments, because, again, unless somebody really delves into understanding what is the shadow and how to work with it, we, as humans, having been trained and entrained in this culture, have this sense that shadow is a bad thing. And in truth, it is not a bad thing. It's an aspect of ourselves that we are very helped by when we embrace it rather than push it away.
So the shadow sounds as you're defining it, similar to transference and projection in psychology. Is it the same, or what is the difference?
I'm not a psychologist, but from my perspective, what I understand about projection and transference, the shadow is actually a result of projection and transference. Those are qualities that, if one engages in them, can result in shadow-like behavior. And it can be useful or it can be harmful, depending upon what is happening in any given situation. So my answer is they're all interrelated. The shadow is really the result. The shadow behavior is the result of what happens when we project onto others or when we are engaged in transference with someone else.
This completes the prepared questions on what is a shadow. Do you have anything you would like to add?
I would like to say that I actually am very excited about shadow work. It is not an aspect of shamanic practice that everyone really gets engaged in or excited about, but I find it a very important aspect of the depth of this work and the root really of amazing personal and spiritual evolution and development. And anybody who embraces and decides that they really want to come to understand their shadow is well served by pursuing this work.
Thank you for listening to Dory Cote on Shamanism. We'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, reactions, and questions. Come on over to dorycote.com and join the conversation. And tune in next week for more on this subject, or next month for a new subject. You can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes or sign up on dorycote.com to receive notices when the podcasts are posted. That's Dory, D-O-R-Y, and Cote, C-O-T-E.com. Drumming and rattling by Dory Cote and Terry Morgan. Technical assistance and audio production by JillHackett.com. And this is Susan Savelle, wishing you many blessings in your life. We hope to have you join us next time.